Amara vanished after just one morning out of the house, and the last place she was seen was only a 20-minute walk from the front door. That's the line Darlene repeats every time a reporter shows up. Every time investigators suggest she should start accepting the truth. But Darlene never did. Every year. On September 17th, she sits by the window of her small house in South Haven, Michigan, staring out toward the pear grove, the place where Curtis and Amara disappeared without a trace. They said it was just a pear-picking trip, but it became a living nightmare, carried in every whisper of the autumn wind she hears. No phone call, no clues, no explanation. Until this summer, when a man appeared at her door, holding a worn plastic bag. Inside were an old pair of muddy blue shoes and a handmade toy train, small, delicate, and unmistakable. Underneath the model were markings she had never seen in her life. Amara was born on a cold March morning in a tiny apartment on the west side of South Haven. She was the only child of Monique, a night shift nurse, and grew up in a home that may have lacked material things, but was overflowing with love. When Monique died in a car accident just after Amara turned 6, Darlene, Monique's mother, became her sole legal guardian. Darlene had already retired after 25 years as a librarian at the local high school, living alone in a modest wooden house near the woods. When she brought Amara home, Darlene told her from now on, "You've got 2 gray heads watching over you, me and Uncle Curtis." Uncle Curtis was Darlene's younger brother, a former locomotive technician who worked at the rail yard in Benton Harbor. After a leg injury from a maintenance accident forced him into early retirement. He still stuck to his habits, waking up early, wearing blue overalls, and tying a red scarf around his neck like he used to. He turned the backyard into a small pear orchard, just about 15 trees enough to stay busy, but not exhausting. To Amara, Uncle Curtis was her very first and dearest friend. He taught her how to use a screwdriver, how to oil gear wheels, and even basic soldering with scrap metal from the old garage on summer afternoons, with cicadas buzzing in the woods behind the house. They sat at a wooden table assembling tiny mechanical models, sometimes a street lamp, sometimes a solar-powered fan, but their most treasured creation was a miniature steam engine built from a condensed milk can, copper wire, and toy car wheels. Curtis called it the locomotive from another world, and Amara named it the escape engine. The community they lived in was a tight-knit neighborhood, just a few hundred families, mostly African-American, many of whom had lived there for generations. Everyone knew each other, knew each other's work schedules, and often shared fruit, baked goods, or groceries with neighbors who didn't have a car. But after the disappearance, that warmth shattered. Familiarity gave way to suspicion, sideways glances, whispered conversations whenever Darlene walked by. They didn't say it out loud, but everyone knew what they were thinking. A jobless man living with a young girl. Was there something going on in that family that no one dared to speak of? Amara wasn't like the other kids in the neighborhood. While most kids played basketball or helped their parents out in the fields, she spent hours reading at the local library, the same one where Darlene had worked. She likes things with gears more than she likes dolls. Darlene would joke with the other moms. The only thing that could pull Amara away from a book was Curtis saying, "Come see this mini fruit washer I just built using an old hairdryer motor." They shared a bond that went beyond blood. It was 2 odd souls who found each other in a quiet corner of the world. Amara always asked why things worked the way they did, and Curtis never minded stopping whatever he was doing to explain piston mechanics, torque transmission, or how to calculate water pressure from an empty tank. No one in town understood how a single, slightly eccentric man like Curtis could be so endlessly patient, but Darlene knew. "That girl is the only thing keeping him anchored to this world," she once said. After retiring due to the injury, Curtis lived a quieter life. He rarely went out unless he needed supplies or to bring pears to the market. The scars from the accident left him with a limp, but his mind was sharp, his eyes still keen behind steel-rimmed glasses. People who had worked with him said Curtis was honest, to a fault meticulous to the point of obsession, never doing anything without triple-checking it. That's why his disappearance without a word, without a sign, without preparation made no sense. A man like Curtis didn't just walk away the night before they vanished. Amara was still working on her physics homework, sketching engine diagrams and taping them to the fridge. Darlene remembered clearly. She said she'd pick pears in the morning and bring some to her old teacher. She even wrapped up a red handkerchief, said, "It'd make the fruit basket look nice." No one knew that handkerchief would be one of the last things left behind, with Amara's scent. That morning. The weather was calm, the sun soft, birds chirping through the trees as they always did. Curtis wore his backpack. Amara carried a small canvas crossbody bag. They left through the back gate that opened into the woods. Neither took a phone, just a quick morning trip. Curtis had said, just a morning trip, and they never came back. After they disappeared. It wasn't just Amara's family that changed. The entire South Haven community was pulled into a silence filled with confusion and quiet dread in the early days. Dozens of people volunteered to search. They divided the wooded area, brought flashlights, search dogs, even a retired electrician's old drone. Everyone believed 2 adults and a child don't just vanish in broad daylight, but by the 7th day, and then into the 2nd week. The number of volunteers dwindled. Community meetings shifted from sharing clues to pointing fingers. Some whispered that Curtis hadn't seemed right since he left his job, that someone once saw him sitting alone at the old rail yard at midnight, talking to himself. The story spread, grew bigger, beyond Darlene's ability to contain. She began noticing the sidelong looks, the nods, instead of the usual, "How are you doing?" Some were more direct, like Mr. Gibbons on the corner, who once told Darlene to her face, "I don't blame you, Mom." But a man living alone raising a little girl, there's always something not right about that. Darlene didn't answer. She just went home, closed the door, turned on the heater in the cool autumn air, and lit a candle next to Amara's photo, to anyone who met her. Amara was a remarkable child. She had big, bright eyes and a habit of tilting her head when she listened intently. Her old teachers said she asked questions that made adults stop and think. How does a spark in our brain know where to go? One question. Her biology teacher never forgot, to the community. Amara symbolized hope. Hope that the next generation might rise beyond the limitations of rural life, reach into science, and go further than anyone in South Haven ever dared to dream. So when Amara disappeared, it wasn't just a family's loss, it left a hole in the heart of the whole town. September 17th, 2014 began like any other autumn morning in South Haven. The air was crisp. Sunlight slanted across tin rooftops. Sparrows chirped through the pear grove behind the house. Amara woke up early, fixed herself a simple breakfast of toast and fried eggs, then checked her small canvas bag one more time. Inside were a water bottle, her carefully folded red handkerchief, a mesh fruit bag, and a pocket guidebook on northern fruit trees. She couldn't hide her excitement. It was the first time this season she and Uncle Curtis were going on a fruit-picking trip. Just the 2 of them. "I'm going to pick the biggest pears and bring them to Miss Martin at school," she said, her eyes glowing. Curtis came down the stairs carrying the old backpack he used during his working days. Inside were a fruit knife, a hand towel, and a few Band-Aids. "You're not going to be climbing trees, right?" he asked with a half-joking tone. Amara stuck out her tongue. "You've been warning me about that for a whole month already." They left the house around 10 a.m., heading through the backyard along the trail that led into the woods, a narrow but well-worn path used by many in the neighborhood for weekend picnics. A neighbor, Mr. Harold, was fixing his porch roof and waved at them from a distance. He remembered the image clearly, the little girl in a gray hoodie with braided pigtails walking quickly beside the quiet man in glasses, a khaki jacket, and worn leather boots. Everything seemed normal until the afternoon. Darlene began to feel uneasy when the sun dipped low and they still hadn't returned. At first, she reassured herself, maybe they ran into someone and stopped to chat. But by 5 p.m., as the sky dimmed and the air grew chilly, her concern turned into a deep, gnawing worry. She called Curtis, only to remember they'd left their phones at home. "It's just a short walk. No need to bring them." By 7 p.m., with still no sign of them. Darlene went door to door asking neighbors, but no one had seen them come back. At midnight, she called the police, but since it hadn't been 24 hours and there were no clear signs of danger, authorities initially just recorded the report and told her to wait until morning. Darlene barely slept that night. Her eyes fixed on the window, ears twitching at every bark or car passing by. That was the beginning of the longest stretch of days in her life, days stacked with fading hope, growing fear, and 1,000 unanswered questions. By morning, an official search party was formed: local police, community volunteers, and a rescue team from a neighboring county. Darlene was there at first light, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep, but her eyes alert. "There's no way two people vanish without a trace within 3 miles, she said, as much to herself as to anyone else. Search teams were divided into 3 directions: the Western Forest Trail, the riverbank, and the path leading to an abandoned rail line that hadn't been used in nearly a decade. Each group had walkie-talkies, maps, and a list of items Curtis might have carried. A local pilot flew a light aircraft overhead to look for disturbances, but reported nothing unusual, just dense, endless trees on the second day. They found a small shoe print, likely Amara's, leading toward a little used path. The mud had dried, making it hard to tell when the print was made. Then the print suddenly stopped at a patch of gravel and vanished. No skid marks, no drag lines, as if the girl had simply disappeared a few feet away. They found a broken pear branch, fresh sap still oozing. A small detail, but it sent a jolt through the search team. Someone had been there, recently, on the 4th day. A volunteer named Andre discovered a torn mesh fruit bag tangled in the brush near a ravine. Inside was a bruised pear and a small red fabric scrap, the same handkerchief Amara had packed. A faint blood stain had soaked into the cloth, but it was unclear who it belonged to. Police collected samples, but with the damp weather and poor preservation, they weren't sure if any usable DNA remained from that point on. The search effort shifted from hopeful to grim. Reporters arrived. Cameras lined the forest entrance. A local news station ran a headline: 12-year-old girl vanishes mysteriously in South Haven. Who saw her last? Police gave no definitive statements, only saying the search was ongoing. But Darlene knew they were starting to treat it as a closed case, and inside her, the vague fear she had felt was now hardening into something more concrete. Someone had been out there. Someone had seen Amara, maybe even Curtis, and made a choice to take them. At first, the media described the disappearance as a strange accident or lost in the woods. But as time passed, the tone grew colder, more probing. Some articles began revisiting Curtis, past his time at the rail yard, his single lifestyle, his back injury, and physical therapy, subtly asking, was there something he was hiding? One site even ran the headline, "The Lonely Man and His Final Walk." Police didn't issue a public theory at first, but in a leaked internal report, Curtis was listed as a person of interest. Sheriff DeWitt told the press, "This is an unusual case with inconsistent evidence, and we're not ruling anything out. In town." The whispers turned to full-blown conversations. A woman from the local church refused to let her kids near Darlene's house. Others canceled neighborhood gatherings, as if the disappearance could somehow spread. Darlene, meanwhile, grew quieter. She kept Amara's photo hung on the white fence out front every week. She posted a new flyer. The ink faded and smudged from rain and sun. She didn't blame anyone, not the police, not the neighbors, but she didn't lean on anyone either. "They think my girl's gone," she told a TV reporter that December, her voice steady. "But I don't. And until you show me a body, don't ask me to let go." Time moved on, leaving behind an unsolved case, a pair of missing shoes, and a child no one saw again. But in Darlene's heart, and in the hearts of a few others, there were still questions that never found answers. If Curtis truly did something, why no note? Why pack food for both? And most of all, who wiped the footprints near the old rail line, 6 months after the disappearance? The investigation took an unexpected turn. A young officer on the case, Tamara Jones, revisited a detail that had been overlooked during the first week: the statement of a gas station attendant named Russell Banks. According to the original report, Russell had claimed to see someone who looked like Curtis at the station around 2 p.m. On the day of the disappearance, just hours after Curtis and Amara had left the house, Russell described the man as wearing a khaki jacket, alone, with mud-stained sleeves and a panicked look on his face, though he refused help. What stuck with Russell most was that the man asked for directions to a shortcut leading to the highway, a route few locals even knew about. as it passed through an old maintenance area tied to the long, shuttered rail line. But since the gas station cameras were down that day due to a temporary outage, the sighting couldn't be verified. The report had been closed with a note unable to confirm identity, that is, until Tamara read it again. She tracked down Russell and asked about the encounter, 6 months later. To her surprise, Russell remembered clearly. He'll never forget that look, like he was either running from something or trying to save someone. That statement made Tamara pause. If Curtis was the perpetrator, why would he go into town? Why ask about a shortcut? And most of all, why show his face? Tamara proposed expanding the search radius toward the abandoned railway line, where the shortcut might have led. Her superiors denied the request, citing budget constraints, time, and the slim chance of survival after 6 months. But the information leaked, and a volunteer group led by Byron, a retired science teacher, decided to conduct their own sweep of the area 3 weeks later. Byron and a former student named Malik discovered a natural rock shelter hidden beneath a cliff near the tracks. Inside, they found a child's handkerchief, once white but now yellowed with age, with 2 red-stitched initials in the corner, AM. There was no blood, no other evidence, but it was the first trace found since the torn fruit bag. Police were notified, once again, due to limited funding and lack of urgent indicators. The item was never fully tested for DNA. The official note read, "Insufficient grounds to establish direct connection to the victim, to Darlene." It was another blow, a clear piece of evidence overlooked. She began to doubt not just the culprit, but the entire system investigating the case. If this were another family, a richer neighborhood, a white child gone missing, would they have handled it this way? She asked at a state news press conference, 10 months after the disappearance. A brief post on a local South Haven forum stirred the silence that had hung over the case for nearly a year. An anonymous account, Trackwalker 1973, posted a few cryptic lines. "I saw that man. He wasn't with anyone, and he wasn't panicked. He had a plan." The comment quickly went viral within the community. Some dismissed it as a hoax, but others began connecting it with the gas station detail, the idea that Curtis may have indeed left alone, possibly leaving Amara behind for reasons unknown. When asked about the post, Darlene simply shook her head. Curtis wasn't tech-savvy. He didn't even know how to use email. Don't take an anonymous account and say he had a plan. A few days later, a man named Levi, who lived near the old railway, contacted the case hotline. He reported that a few weeks before the disappearance, he'd seen Curtis in the area, alone, carrying a measuring tape and flashlight, as if surveying something. I asked if he needed help. He just said he was looking for an old spot from back in the day and left. The sighting clashed with the image of Curtis as a homebound retiree for the past 5 years. This new info led police to reopen the theory that Curtis may have planned his disappearance or had been preparing something, but the questions remained: why take Amara? Why leave the fruit bag? Why no note, no goodbye? If there was a plan, what was it? Meanwhile, Tamara began digging into Curtis' past work with the railroads. In an old technical archive, she discovered that he had once been part of the G3 track repair crew, a sideline used for freight trains, decommissioned in 1999. What stood out was that the G3 track ran through a cluster of maintenance cabins and technical rooms now sealed and abandoned. Tamara proposed a search of the G3 zone. Again, her request was denied for lack of legal grounds. Quietly, she photographed the technical map and brought it to Darlene on a late July evening. The two of them spread the diagram across the kitchen table, comparing the rail lines layout to the clues they'd found. One corner of the map, marked G3 Track B, matched the symbol carved into the toy train Victor had found, SH12, G3 Track B. Darlene's heart sank. Curtis, he left clues, but not everyone knew how to read them. The last person known to have worked with Curtis on the G3 rail team was a man named Elmer Gaines, now retired, living in a mobile home about 40 minutes from South Haven. When Tamara visited, he was sitting on the porch, peeling an apple with a worn-down pocket knife. Curtis, he repeated the name slowly. Nobody like him, obsessively precise, but also the only guy I ever saw stop a whole train for a cat on the tracks. Elmer recalled seeing Curtis about a year before the disappearance. He came looking for me, didn't say much, just asked if I still had the old cabin blueprints, the ones pulled from the system in 2001. I asked what he needed them for. He just said I need to double-check a place. Left something behind when I left. When Tamara asked what it was, Elmer shrugged. He never said, but the look in his eyes, I've never seen anything like it. Fear and determination. Elmer rummaged through an old box of papers and surprisingly found a faded copy of the G3 cabin schematic. Though water-damaged, one part had a red mark, Cabin 12, at the far end of the technical buildings, once a backup power room. Chillingly, it matched the coordinates carved into the model train SH-12, G3, Track B, at the same time. Darlene found something in the old storage shed behind the house, something she'd once thought was trash. A hand-drawn topographic map of South Haven's woods, made by Curtis himself. On it were thin, hand-drawn lines veering away from public trails. And one strange symbol, a steam engine, the same one Curtis and Amara used to sign their shared projects. Next to it, a short message. If you see this, listen for the wheels. The words froze Darlene. It was their code, a private phrase from their game of hide-and-seek. Curtis would whisper it to Amara. The wheels are the signal. If you can't see me, just listen. Amara had always believed their toy train made a unique sound, one only the two of them could recognize. Darlene began to believe the model train wasn't just a toy, it was a survival signal. Now, all the clues seemed to converge on one place. Cabin 12, G3 sector, abandoned, off limits, overlooked by everyone. But if Curtis really left instructions, if Amara had been there, then even bigger questions were beginning to emerge. Who brought them there? And why, after 9 years, did the toy train finally make its way back to Darlene's doorstep? In the summer of 2023, exactly 9 years after the disappearance, a middle-aged man knocked on Darlene's door in the late afternoon. He wore a faded baseball cap, a striped shirt, and held a worn plastic bag in his hands. My name's Victor. I think I found something that belongs to your family. At first, Darlene thought he was just a drifter, but when Victor opened the bag, she froze. Inside was a pair of faded blue sneakers, wrinkled and far too small for an adult. They were Amara's. She recognized them instantly by the stitching on the heel and a tiny pink dot where Amara had once spilled paint. But what made Darlene tremble was the other item in the bag, a small, handmade model train. Crudely crafted from a tin can and scraps of wood, the wheels still turned, and engraved on the bottom, by hand, was a set of letters, SH-12, G3, Track B. Darlene could barely breathe. That train had once sat on their kitchen table all summer in 2014, a birthday gift Amara had built with Uncle Curtis. It was never found after they disappeared. No one knew where it went. And now, it was here. Victor explained that he had worked maintenance on the northern rail line near Kalamazoo, about 70 miles from South Haven, a month earlier, while clearing out an old storage room in a disused substation. He discovered the plastic bag inside a broken wooden cabinet in the basement. I thought it was just some kid's toy left behind. I set it aside, but a few weeks ago, I read an old article about a missing girl named Amara. The name matched the carving on the train wheel. I wasn't sure, but I couldn't keep it to myself. He didn't ask for money, didn't want anything, just handed over the bag, stood still, and said, I hope it's a clue. If not, at least it's a piece of memory. The police were called immediately. The items were sealed and transferred to the state investigation unit, but that simple act from a stranger shattered nearly a decade of silence. Darlene didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window, the model train resting on the table. She turned on the desk lamp Amara once used and stared at the train's wheels, watching the letters Track B flash with each spin. She knew now Curtis never left without a reason. And Amara, if she'd left this behind, it meant she still hoped someone would understand the final message. The next morning, Tamara Jones, no longer with the police, now working as a private investigator, arrived at Darlene's house with a thick notebook. After hearing about the train and the code SH-12G3, Track B, she'd stayed up all night reviewing technical maps of the old railway where Curtis once worked. She laid the map on the table. I think Curtis left us instructions. Each piece of the code is a coordinate. SH-12 likely stood for South Haven Cabin 12. G3 matched the third technical line, the one Curtis had worked on, but what stood out was Track B on the old maps. The G3 line split into 3 branches. Track B led to a temporary storage shed built in 1997 for inspection crews abandoned after 2001 and no longer listed on any official railway documents. No one noticed it because it's not part of any mandatory inspection routes. Tamara explained, "It's not on any police map." "And it was never formally searched," Darlene asked. "So if Curtis left us a message, where was he pointing?" Tamara tapped a faint square on the blueprint. "Here, auxiliary cabin 12, the one place hidden long enough and deep enough." They decided not to wait for official permission. Darlene called Byron and Malik, the same two who had joined the search years ago, to help. The next day, the group drove out to G3, pushing through waist-high brush and rusted rails buried in wild grass. Finally, they reached a small storage building, almost completely swallowed by vines. On the door, faded red paint barely formed the number 12. Inside, the air reeked of mold, rotting wood, and dust. But in the back corner, beneath a dislodged floorboard, they uncovered a wooden compartment about 2 feet deep. Inside were a few old items, an empty tin box, a handful of 2003 pennies, and another worn plastic bag torn, but still holding a carefully folded piece of paper. Darlene's hands trembled as she opened it, a hand-drawn sketch of a train car. With childlike handwriting in the bottom corner, "I miss you. I'm still here." No name, no location. But Darlene recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Amara's. That single piece of paper, "I miss you, I'm still here," was more than the first trace of life from Amara in nearly a decade. It was a seismic emotional jolt for everyone who had assumed the case was closed. Darlene collapsed onto the dusty wooden floor, not from fear, but from the overwhelming wave of emotion, a mix of hope and horror. If Amara had been alive when she wrote this, where had she been? Why had she stayed silent? And who was keeping her? Tamara immediately contacted the FBI, requesting a full forensic sweep of the G3 cabin area. But by the time federal agents arrived, the room had been disturbed. The hidden compartment was gone. The drawing vanished. Every trace seemed deliberately erased, from footprints to disturbed dust to the pried-up floorboards. And a chilling truth began to emerge. Someone else had also deciphered the train's code, and they had returned one step ahead. Handwriting analysis confirmed the letter matched Amara's 2014 samples with 87% certainty. Not absolute, but enough for the FBI to consider reopening the case. Darlene was asked to provide DNA for comparison a week later. The results confirmed the DNA found on the sneakers Victor had returned matched Amara's childhood medical records. She had worn those shoes, and they were never found at the original scene. But that wasn't all. An independent data analyst, after seeing the model train in the news, emailed Tamara. He said the design looked nearly identical to a Cold War-era signal device, a tool used to hide messages inside toys. When rotated in a specific pattern, a hidden compartment would pop open. Tamara tested the train again, this time thoroughly. When the wheels were spun 3 times in the correct sequence, a tiny panel at the train's base slid open. Inside was a folded scrap of paper, divided into 8 squares. The writing was faint but readable. Tunnel 3. Metal wall. Beneath the bench. Darlene nearly collapsed. Curtis hadn't just left behind a toy, he'd left behind a code, and possibly a map to where Amara once was, or still might be, now. The story was no longer "they vanished." It had become, "they were trying to tell us for 9 years, and no one listened." When news broke about the model train containing a hidden code, the media frenzy erupted. South Haven, once silenced by nearly a decade of grief, suddenly became the focus of national attention. TV crews descended, true crime podcasters tracked down Darlene, asking about the clue metal wall, tunnel number 3, but beneath the headlines and flashing cameras, a deeper crisis of faith quietly spread. Darlene began to revisit questions she'd long pushed aside. Was Curtis truly innocent? If he tried to get Amara out, why didn't he call her? If he left a signal, where had he been for 9 years? Why didn't he come back? The more facts came to light, the more tangled the picture became. Curtis seemed both like the man trying to save Amara, and possibly the one who led her closest to danger. Tamara, too, found herself torn between two investigative paths. On one hand, all signs pointed to Curtis. He alone would have known how to leave a coded train model, how to access cabin 12. But on the other hand, if he had a plan, why risk it all on a toy that could be lost or misread if this was a conspiracy? Why make it traceable? Unless he wasn't the one in control. Unless he never meant to leave that place. Then came a new witness, Felix. A delivery driver for a lumber plant near G3 came forward. He recalled seeing a light inside cabin 12 during a fall night in 2014, something seemingly impossible, as the area had long been cut off from power. When he approached, he heard the clanging of metal like springs or a heavy door being dragged, but assuming it was a homeless camp, he didn't report it. "I didn't know someone might be needed help," he said. "If I'd stopped, maybe things would have turned out different." The evidence was mounting, but pointing nowhere. The FBI combed through the entire cabin area, but found no Tunnel 3. The metal walls were scanned with ground-penetrating radar, no anomalies. The trail returned to nothing. Every clue, the model train, the drawings, the handwriting all hinted at something, but never enough to reveal the truth. And then came the question that chilled everyone to the bone. What if Curtis didn't leave the train model? What if someone else planted it to create the illusion that Amara was still alive? What if the whole thing was a psychological trap? Bit by bit, what once seemed like a breakthrough began to unravel under fresh scrutiny. A report from the federal lab delivered a stunning blow. The note that read, "I miss you. I'm still here," had been written in ink that wasn't manufactured until after 2018. It couldn't have been written in 2014. Tamara, reading the report, felt the air leave her chest. If it was forged, who did it, and why Darlene couldn't accept it? She sat in her living room, holding the model train, eyes fixed on the dusty little wheel. "If Amara didn't write this, then who's playing this cruel game with me?" she whispered. Yet, inside, one doubt refused to die. Too many pieces still didn't add up the shoes. The train's hidden mechanism, the Track B code. If someone faked this, they had deep knowledge of railway systems, something only Curtis, Elmer, or a few old engineers would know. Tamara began digging into Victor's background, the man who'd brought the plastic bag. And there, everything started to wobble. Victor had once worked as a mechanical assistant under Curtis, but his name was nowhere in the G3 team's records, as if it had been deliberately removed. On top of that, he'd previously been investigated for stealing industrial materials, but the case was dropped due to lack of evidence. Public opinion split. Some believed Victor had been the one keeping Amara, that he returned after years out of fear of being found out. Others thought he was racked with guilt, trying to help without the courage to tell the full truth. Victor, bombarded by press inquiries, withdrew completely. His final voicemail to Tamara said, "I thought I was doing the right thing, but maybe I underestimated how dangerous this really was." A new, far more terrifying theory began to take shape if someone had kept Amara. That person not only knew Curtis' past, they understood exactly how to manipulate Darlene's hope, creating the train, embedding clues, dropping just enough evidence to stir belief. These were not the actions of a confused individual. This was psychological precision. And now, the most haunting question echoed through every investigator's mind: did Amara really survive the initial disappearance, or had someone orchestrated a long con, stretching hope just far enough to crush it in the days after the forgery revelation spread? South Haven felt like winter had arrived early. What had once been a story of perseverance, a grandmother's unwavering hope, was now caught in a storm of doubt, distortion, and division. Darlene didn't leave her house for nearly a week. She turned off the doorbell, unplugged the phone, and left a note on her gate. "If you're not here for Amara, don't knock." But no one blamed her, because everyone understood being betrayed by the very hope you've clung to for 9 years is the cruelest wound a human heart can bear. Tamara, though no longer in law enforcement, kept working quietly. She began questioning everything from Russell's original gas station testimony to the coincidental camera failure, to the hand-drawn maps from Curtis, and even the G3 diagram Elmer had supplied. Something was wrong. Someone wasn't just hiding the truth, they were building a whole new version of it, convincing others to believe in a story with an agenda, in a last attempt to break through. Tamara visited a former federal abduction investigator named Roseanne Wright after reviewing the entire case file, photos, and timeline. Roseanne said just one thing: "I think we're looking in the wrong direction," to her. The real question wasn't, was Amara ever in cabin G3, but who wanted us to believe she was a train model too elaborate to be coincidence. A note in modern ink, a man who knew too much and vanished at just the right moment, she concluded. Maybe the original disappearance was real, but everything after is memory manipulation, and when memory is shaped long enough, people begin to doubt even themselves. And during all that time, Amara, if she's alive, had been turned into a symbol, a message, a dream, rather than a real person, at a closed-door meeting of volunteer investigators. Darlene showed up for the first time in months. She said little, just placed the model train on the table and looked each person in the eye. "If this is fake, then who wants me to believe it so badly?" she asked. "And if it's real, then why was I the only one meant to receive it?" The room fell silent. No one had an answer. In the fall of 2024, exactly 10 years after Amara and Curtis disappeared, a small memorial was held in South Haven's Central Park. No banners, no cameras. Just a quiet circle of old friends, Amara's former classmates, and a few people who had once joined the search. In the center stood a small wooden table, holding a glass-encased model train, the very one Darlene had received from Victor. No one gave speeches. There were no rituals. Just silent gazes cast backward toward a past that had torn them apart, brought them together, and left them suspended in a space that had no name. Darlene still lived in the same old house. She still kept Amara's photo on the gate, still lit a candle every September 17th, and still refused to give interviews about belief. When asked whether she still thought Amara was alive, she simply said, "Belief isn't something that needs a reason. It's what you hold on to when everything else has fallen away." Tamara continued her independent investigation. She compiled a nearly 200-page report, outlining every irregularity in the case, from timeline discrepancies to media behavior, from overlooked details to evidence that was never properly analyzed. The report ended with a line that lingered long after reading, "If there was a perpetrator." They didn't just hide Amara, they mastered hiding the very story around her. As for Victor, the man who returned the model, he was never seen again. The address he'd provided was real, but the house stood empty. Neighbors said he left in the middle of the night, carrying just one bag. No one knew who he really was. No one ever found him. In the end, this story had no resolution, no arrests, no clearances, no body, no suicide note, no confession, no security footage that ever revealed the truth. Only a small, weathered model train an object so slight, yet from it, an entire community was forced to revisit its memory, question one another, and face an unanswered absence. And sometimes, it's that absence, the silence that stretches on, that stirs the deepest fear that in a modern world full of cameras and tracking devices, someone can still vanish completely, and no one knows why.